Apple and the EU are at it again. Apple has a good reason for getting out of buy now, pay later, and some heavy discussion on the iPhone in-school ban. This is MacVoices. Today's edition of MacVoices is supported by ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. Visit expressvpn.com/MacVoices, and you can get an extra 3 months free on a 1-year package. So I'm going to throw articles into the chats, 2 different ones about the same topic. And this is the fact that Apple has said some new features won't come to the EU due to the DMA. The articles I'm throwing in are from Ars Technica and also one from Jason Snell at 6 Colors. And I'm anxious to hear what this group thinks because, and Mark, I'm looking at your background and thinking, is this what you were referring to? Is Apple starting to play just a little hardball with the EU?
I don't know if I'd say they're playing hardball, but I think they're certainly repositioning themselves so that they can foreclose an attack. Like happened with they said, "Hey, we're compliant with the DMA." Now they're coming back and saying, "Oh, well, no, you're not." So I think now they're just completely sidestepping it and turning the regulatory bodies over in Europe back on themselves to we don't know if we can safely release this, so you tell us if this is safe. And we're prepared to do that or not to release it to your customers. It's your choice. So I think by doing that, they're taking sort of the moral high ground in a PR battle, as seen by Apple maybe fans and others could critique it differently. But I think it's a markedly different stance and approach on this, as well as there's another article in the stack if we get to that has the same sort of characteristics in it.
Okay. Anybody have thoughts on this? Because I like it. I mean, I like it because Apple is not saying that. The way I read it, Apple's not exactly pushing back on the EU. They're just subtly saying, look, we don't want to give you any more baseball bats to beat us with. So you're going to have to talk to us a little bit about this before we release it, or we just won't give your customers access to it. And that could be interesting. Jeff.
I would like for Apple to list the points in the DMA that they feel that these features would run afoul of. And then I think it would be much easier to have a discussion about what it would take to make those features available in the EU. I think it would also help reduce the discussion that I'm seeing going around where people are saying Apple is weaponizing the DMA they're weaponizing their platform against the DMA by doing things like this. And I don't know. I think that would be a foolish move on Apple's part if that's what they are doing. So being able to see exactly what they're saying the problems are, I think would be great.
Brian?
Yeah, when I was reading these stories, I had a thought. I recall when if you wanted to take advantage of some of the opportunities to download apps off of the non-Apple App Store, and then you came back, let's say you were visiting, you're an American visiting in Europe, but then when you left, you would no longer function, some of those apps, or at least no longer receive updates, I believe. I'm just wondering how that may look if you were an American visiting in the EU with your iPhone that you brought from home. Would your Apple Intelligence just cease to work, or how might that look? It's just speculation. I'm just curious.
That's an interesting comparison because it was driven by the DMA. And so, I mean, it presents a real problem for Apple if they have to start producing different versions of the OS or start trying to regionalize features. On the other hand, it's not good business to just roll out everything and then get fined some of these crazy things, some of the crazy amounts that we're seeing. Mark?
Yeah. So maybe relay point to Jeff. I think instead of Apple listing, here's a list, 1 through whatever of concerns we have. I think the beauty of their approach is, if you look what happened, they had the DMA restrictions. They came out and did it. They came out with the platform fee, right? So that developers of certain sizes still have to pay money to Apple for use of the platform. And now the DMA is coming back and saying, well, you're not following the constraints. There's a lot of speculation that they expected it would be free instead of having 27 or half of that percentage fee. But the DMA law, as I understand it, from not having read it, but from informed commentary, says nothing about having fees. So I think Apple is sort of in this ping pong situation of I think they're a serious company. Yes, they're aggressive. But they're a serious company, and I think they willfully did their best to comply with the terms of the DMA, obviously in a one-sided manner. And now they're just coming back and say, well, you're not complying, and they're not really saying anything except maybe we have a year to talk with us, and a year from now we'll issue some sort of. I mean, that just sounds like just mushy, confused thinking. So. I think, to stop it again is, get some of the public pressure, get citizens, well, UK is no longer in the EU, but get citizens in France and Germany and Italy demanding, that their government, hey, this AI stuff is really cool. My cousins have it. I can have it if I go to the US and buy a phone there and, use my cousin's address, but, we can't buy it over here. Let's create a ground. I think, they should create a groundswell of support so that, their regulatory bureaucrats see that there's real consequences of their action. It's not just some academic discussion in offices in Brussels.
Marty?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about this more than I have answers or comments. I guess they opened up a gate to the garden when they did the European app stores that can be created. And I think we've all expressed our potential concerns for that. And Apple, of course, then has to look at the security of those or the ramifications of it. And I'm wondering if this is just, looking at if we have to start doing all these other things on phones, what risks does that open up to us for customer data? If it suddenly is opened up for phones to be able to do this and maybe third-party agents being able to use it. So maybe that's kind of the comments that Jeff would like to have them clarify and say, these are the issues that we see with it, or have the EU come back and say, this is specifically what we want you to be able to do. And then Apple can respond to it. But right now it's pretty mushy.
Yeah, you know what? There are times it feels like that inevitable argument that you've had with a significant other at one point or another in your life, where they say, "I'm mad at you," and you say, "Why?" And said, "Well," and they say, "Well, if you don't know, I'm certainly not going to tell you." That's kind of what this feels
the
like.
EU is Apple's passive aggressive partner.
Yeah, and so I look at this and I also am starting to wonder if the EU is, I mean, A, are they getting it too big for their britches? And B, are they just starting to look at Apple and Microsoft and some of these other companies as just cash cows that they can milk because they get to write the rules and decide, where a violation is and isn't? Eric, you're up next.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure where to go with my comments, but I guess just sort of in reading general commentary back and forth, I guess the question is Apple really the good guys in this? And is the EU really as clueless as they are portrayed, or are they just not presenting it clearly? And I'm not seeing enough in the articles about what's going on with actual European developers. Maybe smaller or mid-range ones. We hear about the really, really large ones. But how are the proposed rules going to affect them? Is it better for the diversity of development or worse? And I'm not a developer, so I can't really comment on that. It's more of a curiosity. I want articles from a different viewpoint, I guess, and I'm not finding them.
Okay. Webb?
Yeah, I just very briefly, I think what's interesting to me is, and I don't want to sit here that I understand the whole DMA argument to begin with. I understand bits and pieces of it, but Apple's taking the approach of sometimes the best defense is a good offense. So instead of trying to sit there and defend themselves, they're going to the EU, just saying, guys, I don't understand what the rules are. I don't understand what we can and cannot do. I don't understand what we can and cannot protect. And I think that's a very interesting approach that how Apple's taken to this. So like I said, best defense is a good offense. And they, instead of being in the defensive posture, they're taking an offensive posture and seeing how that plays. That's my comment. So.
Do they have anything to lose at this point, Webb, given, the reception they got previously to their actions? And, at what we still have that thing going on, that the App Store, everything they did with the App Store is not adequate. And now we have this new thing potentially, and I'm with you, so that's still sitting over there. Now we have a new potential issue. Now, how about you lay out the ground rules for us before we even, announce in your countries? So, yeah, good point.
Yeah. I've been wrong before.
Haven't we all? Haven't we all? Today's Mac Voices is supported by ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. Are you a private citizen? What does that even mean anymore? In the internet age, everything everyone browses, searches for, watches, or posts to social media is crawled, collected, and aggregated into a permanent record, your record. While I'm not up to anything nefarious, and you probably aren't either, I still don't like the idea of just anyone knowing what toppings I like on my pizza. That's why I use ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN prevents the bad guys from tracking your unique IP address and also encrypts 100% of your network traffic, at home or on public Wi-Fi. I have some summer travel planned, and those plans include being sure that ExpressVPN is turned on every time I connect, from the road, from the hotel, wherever, because they are always looking over your shoulder. Protect your online privacy today by visiting expressvpn.com/MacVoices. That's ExpressVPN, ExpressVPN.com/MacVoices, and you can get an extra 3 months free. expressvpn.com/MacVoices. Thanks to ExpressVPN for supporting Mac Voices. I'm throwing this in. Brian, I think you're the one that brought this as a follow-up to last week's discussion about it, the closing or the discontinuing of Apple Pay Later, that there's a truth in lending law that it has not been determined exactly that the Apple's or some of the other buy now, pay later, not schemes, features, offerings, may violate, and that Apple may just be heading for the door early just so they're not caught up in this. Is that the way you read it?
Yeah, almost exactly what you were mentioning. It's just, are they getting themselves into potential trouble, that may come about by continuing this offering?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting choice. And funny thing is, as I was compiling this today, I was listening to some podcasts, and Apple is still, that the Apple Card is still being heavily advertised on a number of different business and news-oriented podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
So, you think about they're withdrawing this. We have the Goldman Sachs allegedly getting ready to pull out. So I don't think Apple Card's going anywhere. It's just who's going to be the new partner, or in what form is it going to take? And maybe not having a buy now, pay later option makes it easier to attract that new partner.
Yep.
So,
was Goldman Sachs backing it up as the thing? The buy now, pay later.
I don't believe so. I think it was on Apple.
Weren't they?
No.
Do we know that?
I don't.
Sure.
I think Goldman Sachs has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, they didn't have anything to do with that.
There was discussion about Apple having a connection with a firm, which essentially does the buy now, pay later, and them getting into contract with that. So they're taking that out of their business model and turning it over to a firm.
Yeah. Mark?
Yeah, I think we talked about last week that originally I think Apple's version of buy now, pay later is they underwrote the risk. And I think that Brian, this is a great article, because I saw that and I read about a third of the proposed rule that the Consumer Finance Protection Board, or whatever, CFPB, some government mix of names, had. So I see this as Apple just clearly getting out of the way of a potential liability. Because in there they're advancing a new theory that these under this strict definition of this 1968 or 1960 law rule, it could be interpreted to mean that these things are now offering credit and they don't have all these other disclosures, so therefore they're open to who knows whatever set of liability. I think Apple just sidestepped this. I think it seems to be a very classic Apple move. It's sort of like why they partnered originally with AT&T and then other carriers, because they don't want to be in this phone business. And for a while, the teens, there's a lot of discussion and people saying, oh, Apple should become their own private network operator. But think about it. Do that around the world. That's just a bucket of lots of costs and complication for no obvious benefit other than partnering with people who are in the business of doing that. And I think, like we said last week, if Apple's does do a deal with a firm a firm is set up to handle all that business and disclosures, and not Apple. So it's not it's not something that Apple would have responsibility for. So we'll have to see how this changes and advances. And I dare say, if we have a change in administration in November, this will go nowhere. If we don't have a change of administration, I think we'll see other topics to talk about in next year and beyond about this crackdown of buy now, pay later type of services.
Yeah, the article does a great job of listing some of the responsibilities that apparently would, if I'm understanding the article correctly, potentially could fall in Apple's lap if the ruling were to be interpreted in the wrong, in a direction. And you're right, Mark, why Apple would want to get into that part of the business when I don't know that there are any published statistics about how much business this has brought Apple's way, but it would make much more sense, again, to your point, just partner with somebody that does it as part of their business model and is equipped to handle some of those ancillary things.
Right. Especially if they're under attack, they don't want another thing making them look like, a bad corporation by getting mired in, a mud throwing exercise over the good or bad of buy now, pay later services. So yeah. I think they're just looking ahead. Somebody there is getting paid the big bucks to sidestep and avoid this quagmire entirely.
So the next thing that I wanted to bring to the table, and I want to start with Marty and Brian especially, because this is the proposed smartphone ban in schools in California. And given that both Marty and Brian are educators, I'm curious to see what you think. Is this a good idea? Is this not a good idea? I personally can think of a lot of arguments in both directions. Marty, how about if we start with you?
I think it's great. Kids can go back to passing folded up notes like we used to when we were kids. I think I've seen it done in other countries. I've seen it done for purpose in other countries and actually be very effective. I've seen it done here in the US where teachers, and not at the college level, but teachers have, bags up on the wall where people can check their phones in before they come into class. And it creates a different class environment. I think these decisions that are happening state by state are really parental pressure that is causing this to happen. I don't think it's necessary. I think educators see it as a preference, but I think the governor's decision in California, and I think also New York, they mentioned in the article, I think it's coming because parent groups are kind of saying we need to focus more on education, and not along with the cyberbullying stuff that's been going on, and the mental health issues with social media. That's where I think the change is happening. But yeah, kids will start passing notes again, and I think that's great.
Penmanship.
Brian, how about you? You for this? Are you against it? You just sort of neutral as to, there are pros and cons?
Well, first I'm looking at the article and I'm seeing two different things. So I'm seeing the aspect regarding social media and the mental health issues connected to it. So I understand from that perspective. And then I'm looking at the idea of, while you're in school, having that phone, required to be put away. And from California, it looks like at the state level. I know for several school districts in Arizona have implemented something similar to this, where they've, taken the phones, put them in little lockers, something at the beginning of the day. Several schools individually, will have their students. And again, I'm speaking from the perspective of a secondary teacher, somebody in the junior high and high school grade levels, but putting their phones up while they enter the classroom. There certainly is something, though, that's important, I think, is learning how to use technology in the right way and learning a responsible way to use technology. I can tell you personally, as an educator, what I would have my students do is they would put them up. When I greet my students at the door, though, as they come through, one thing that we built and continue and reinforce throughout the entire school year is the relationship building and that rapport that we have between student and teacher, and the importance of, if there's something going on that you're going to need your phone for, somebody's in the hospital, you need to check up and, they're checking on you, you're checking on them, that type of thing. That's the opportunity, as we have that rapport, as you're coming through that doorway, to let me know. And that way, that's a responsible use of technology. As an adult, if I'm at a conference, being able to maybe let the presenter know, hey, I don't want to be rude, but I need to check my phone a little bit. It's nothing against you. It has nothing to do with your presentation. It's about me, and what I have to check in with. So those types of things I think are vitally important. The aspect with, and I don't want to take away anything from the harmful effects, of social media and cyberbullying and that type of thing. But I'm seeing that less in the actual classroom during the school day and more in the after the school day is over, more like your evenings and weekends, breaks from school, those types of things. I'm seeing that a lot more. So to come back around on it, am I for or against it? Leaning towards against it at the whole state level. I think at the individual school level has a lot more, in my opinion, a lot more useful reason for it, and being able to control it with the relationship building and knowing your students and teaching that responsible use of technology.
Brian, I have a follow-up question.
Yes, sir.
Part two, I guess. Question number one, how do your students react to it? And does it change over a couple days, couple weeks? And then are other teachers doing similar things, and how do students react to those?
Sure. So over the several years I've worked at the schools that I've worked at, a lot of it does depend on the administration and who your administrator is. Some of them will be more school policy wide, and some of them are more classroom policy. So I've seen it both ways. But with regards to how the students react, one thing that I do personally is I think Marty was talking about, kind of the place where students can put their phones up, as long as the student sees their phone. I mean, these phones aren't cheap. I mean, these phones, the students carry around iPhones, the current generation of iPhone or the previous generation of iPhone, there's still a lot of money, and you want to make sure that you can see that technology. So I think a lot of it has to do with knowing your students. And, if it gets out of hand, that you could call an administrator, and, that's a conversation that goes outside the classroom between that student and the administrator. Depending on the grade level, it might be maybe the parent has to pick up that phone, and the student gets that phone taken away. But yeah, but that's usually the exception, not the rule.
So are they compliant, or do they object? And how, and in your situation, do you have a visible place where they can see it so they know they're not getting stolen and losing their device?
Yeah, there's, depending on which classroom I'm in, I've gone between different classrooms. We have like a shoe rack holder, but it has a clean, like a see-through window.
Clear, yeah, I know.
Yeah, those types of things. And there's different things you could do. You can number the desk, 1 through 30 or whatever, and then number the shoe holders 1 through 30, and then they just fit inside there. Desk number 2 has a person sitting there. Desk number 2 has their phone, up, and that type of thing. It's always visible. It's always there. I do work with students that are older, your 16 to 22-year-olds, and those students tend, again, they're young adults. They hold jobs. They support their families. And, I tell them, you leave the room, you take your phone with you. You come back to the room, put your phone away, and like I said, if there's more of and again, working with your students, I think you're giving them the responsibility. You're able to then, there's that rapport, that trust, that, they're there to get their work done, not to mess around on their phones.
Brian, well, first of all, let me bring the chat room in, because the chat room, Ben Rathen couldn't be here tonight because he's again under a thunderstorm attack. But he said many schools had this policy, the kids ignored it, which if that's the case, then, if it was a policy, then that's the failure of the school administration to enforce it, if it really was something they felt that strongly about. Let's see. Barry said banning the technology due to the fear of effects is not addressing the root problem, which is, I think, a fair point. And then Barry says, what you resist persists. Yeah, and that seems to be the case. And just, you can go cite a dozen different examples. The more that the adults, try to ban things or put it down, the more that it's likely to be a desired thing. But Brian, I'm very impressed by the idea, just the concept of putting the responsibility in the kids' hands, almost as a teaching moment for responsible use of technology like this. And I would applaud you for recognizing that there are situations that it might be completely legitimate to have a phone on somebody's desk, waiting to hear something from a hospital or something like that. You'd like to think that doesn't happen often. It probably happens more often than we appreciate with all the kids, the volume of kids that you see. So it sounds like yours is a good, mature approach.
Yeah.
It also, but does it take away from your teaching time, or do you just see it as part of the process?
Well, I see it as part of the process because the phone is up. It's not, they're not in possession of the phone. It's the rare cases where a student says, I need to have my phone nearby, that's a moment to connect with your student, let me know what I can do to support you. Let me know what you need. If there is somebody in the hospital, because in that way, if it's an issue, let's see if we can get administration involved. If it's something longer term, maybe you need an extension on assignments, or your course needs to end a little later. It's treating people like human beings that have life happens, things come up. Just like any of us, if we had something come up, we could, ask our bosses if appropriate for an extension on something or whatnot, and it's obvious if it's abused, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Marty?
Yeah, I agree with, in part, the comments that Barry made in the chat room about, banning technology doesn't help the situation. I think it's wise use of technology. And I think the concern is, there's a couple of concerns. There's concern about attentiveness and focus of what's going on in terms of the teaching moment. And there's also the concern that folks are going to potentially misuse it or not use it in a way that's helpful. So it could be the concern is that teaching engagement is not very good in the classroom. So kids are more attracted to look at their small screens than to look at what's going on in the classroom. That is a problem, as Barry had suggested. That is an issue that probably needs to be addressed. And integrating the technology with teaching, and I think I heard of a study done in Japan where most of the folks were on technology. This is years ago. Most of the folks were on technology in the classroom, and the way the teacher dealt with it was to start to do the assignments through that platform so they could use the technology to get the platform done. So it could be a teaching attention issue. It could be a distraction. It could be trying to prevent cyberbullying or mental health issues. I think it's more of the first two than it is really the latter.
Brian, I want you to make that comment that you threw in a private chat, because that really says something to me about how you teach and how you engage your students.
Yeah, I was just kind of going on the idea that sometimes there's, you want your students to learn appropriate use of technology in the classroom. There's review games, there's things like Kahoot, where you pull out it's a connection. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a popular, usually in a review setting to review material, that students can do a quick quiz. Sometimes, you can set up where it's anonymous and review material, but they're using their own personal devices for it. You can have them use laptops and things like that too, but usually it's just more convenient with the phones they have in their pockets. But yeah.
But I that's really intriguing to think of that being used in a classroom setting to get students' feedback, and it could be something fun. It could be something some serious feedback about is the explanation of this concept resonating with you? Do you get it? So that you as a teacher get some real-time feedback, assuming that the kids aren't there and going to mess with you, but assuming they have the right attitude too. But this all circles back to the whole idea that you started with, that you're trying to teach them responsible use of technology, not just to mess with the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So good discussion.
Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.